And we are live. Good morning. It's Friday. You made it through not only to Friday, gosh, September. Hard to believe that September is now the last day of September. The leaves are starting to change. I got a maple tree outside my house here, Paige, that's probably about 50% red. So it's looking really awesome. So
Red's nice.
I
About
love this time of year. So good morning, everybody. My name is Bryan Armentrout, and I'm with the Food Leadership Group. And you have joined us today on Friday for the Food Safety Chat. This is a discussion of all things food safety for manufacturing and FDA and FSMA and all these type of things. And if you're new to the show, welcome. One of the things that we do here as part of our tradition is please go in the chat and just let us know where you're at in the world. So my guest, Paige, and I today are both here in lovely Colorado. So we're very fortunate to live in this part of the country. And this is May and September, probably my two favorite times of year out here in Colorado. And this is the time of year where things start getting a little questionable from the standpoint of weather, right? Because you can have a beautiful day and then it's snowing the next day. It's kind of crazy along that side. So with the Food Safety Chat, we do this every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Mountain, where we're at here. And we talk about a topic, and you'll notice with this that this is not a lecture. This is not a presentation. This is not a webinar. This is meant to be an interactive discussion to help share food safety knowledge and help people grow in that capacity. So every week I bring on a special guest, and this week I'm very happy to bring Paige Appleton from Caliper on board. So Paige, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Bryan. Thanks. Really looking forward to the weather this weekend. It's supposed to be beautiful.
Yes, yeah, the wet, low to mid 70s, and
yep. And the trees are just perfectly golden this weekend. It's been beautiful.
And in case you're wondering, Paige and I were talking here before we started. If you think that's a fake background behind her, it's not. That's her real house, which looks amazing. I'm super jealous. So love it. And so Paige is the senior QA QC manager with the company. And so she's responsible for all things quality in a space that I think now has kind of evolved a little bit, and we can kind of start looking what's going on in the cannabis space. And of course, you're in Colorado, big business. And so I'm very curious today. I think everybody's going to learn a lot how what we know around food safety is being applied to this industry. But before we get started, please, everybody, one of the traditions we have here is join Paige and I for a ceremonial drink of your favorite beverage. So I mentioned on before, but it's kind of one of those things that's weird, right? Why is it when we like take a drink of coffee or something, we go, right? When you drink it, you don't do it with other stuff, right? You don't do it with, you're drinking your Coke or something. You're like, don't do it. So we have some wonderful people here on board that we see. And one of the things too here is, if you're new to this as well, is we've got a nice group of regulars who join us here every week and commit this hour to learning new things and widening their perspective, which is super awesome. So Frank is here. Good to see Frank. Don is here in Allentown, PA. Lance, Marshall, Austin, of course, my friend here in Colorado as well. Austin, I owe you a call. That's coming today. And Tim, right? It's so great to see these people, right? We're building this little community. And on that note, I put a link in here, and I'll also have one here at the end as well for Locals. And if you're not familiar with Locals, it's this really cool little platform that I use to share food safety information and things that catch my eye. And generally, I'll send these out once or twice a week, depending on what's going on. And that comes right to your mailbox, and it's free. So free is always good. There's also a membership side to that where I'll post videos and worksheets or other more detailed information that I have. And those are for the members. And that's kind of a little thank you for helping to support these activities. So wouldn't be a food safety community with that piece of it. So think about joining Locals if you haven't done that. So with that, super excited to jump in this. So Paige works in a very interesting industry, to say the least, and that's kind of the cannabis space, right? And this has really evolved from, Cheech and Chong and things like this when I was a kid, right? It's, the potheads hanging out and these type of things. Totally not the industry now, right?
Nope.
Well, and what's interesting is so you have shops here in Colorado, and used to have, strictly the medical license ones, and then the recreational ones, and these things have kind of blended. But what's interesting is when you go in there, the mix of people you see, right? It's not Cheech and Chong, right? And you have and kind of what I refer to, Paige, as kind of the connoisseurs, right? They're kind of like the, the wine drinkers, right? And
Yeah.
you'll see them with the, as they call them, the bud tenders, right? The experts and these type of things. And they have these jars of different types of marijuana, and they'll open them and kind of smell. And, oh yes, this one. Okay, yeah. So I like that one. Let's, and it's very much an event, right? And they'll purchase those. And then another big chunk of the industry then is the edibles and other type of products as well. And so with that, we kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit. So maybe a good place to start on this is kind of giving us your perspective on the industry now, kind of the regulatory framework and these type of things.
Yes. Okay. So we primarily operate out of Colorado. We have been in Michigan, and there's definitely a lot of differences. Every single state has a different approach to regulation. In Colorado, since this was the first state, they wrote their own rules, which was a unique, unique strategy. So they kind of just rewrote a lot of the rules. Yep. The other states like Michigan, they just said reference 21 CFR 117, 111, whatever is applicable to you. That's not what Colorado did. They actually just took components and then rewrote it with the purpose of cannabis in mind. Actually, most of the regulations here in Colorado are really geared towards like flower, because that's a large portion of the market. Edibles have really, exploded after the recreational market opened back in 2012. So it's been a long time, but really interesting strategy here in Colorado, and there's some nuance. But I mean, for the most part, they really try to, they've done a couple science working groups. They've had requests for recall programs, CAPA programs. It's really, the state is trying to strike a balance between not making the barrier to entry too high and driving for continuous improvement. The enforcement really is not super, they're not super on it. In my experience, at least, you have to be doing something pretty egregious for an inspection. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of companies out there doing the right thing just because they choose to. That's why Caliper / Ripple is the company that I work for that's in the cannabis, the THC space. Caliper is our CBD side. So there aren't a lot of companies out there that are just electing to do the right thing. And that's what I'm an example of. Obviously, companies wouldn't have a senior manager of quality and compliance if they really didn't care.
Exactly. And so within Colorado, it's the Colorado Department of Health who does the regulations, correct? So you're sending out inspectors through that department, or
so CBD space, it's the CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. So that's the industrial hemp side. For THC, it's the Marijuana Enforcement Division. They're two different bodies. So we elect to comply with both. Obviously, we have to comply on the CBD side with the CDPHE. On the THC side, we do comply with the MED as well as we choose FDA.
MED, I'm sorry, what's that?
The Marijuana Enforcement Division.
Thank you. It's always funny, isn't it? In every industry and every business, right? We all have our own lingo and vernacular, don't we? So, okay, good. And so, as I understand it, then too, right? Most of the businesses are kind of concentrated in the Denver metro area, but I would imagine too. I mean, especially with hemp, right? You're going to have people outside of that in growing regions in Colorado, right? There's a lot of agriculture here. So, do they travel? Do they travel to those locations, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who has a license, through the MED is subject to potential inspection. So the inspectors would go, like, their territory is basically the state of Colorado, and everybody's eligible for that.
Gotcha. Interesting. So, so from your perspective, then, so how long has this business been in place now in Colorado for the medical and the recreational? I know they had different staggered times, but just kind of ballparking it. What, 8 years?
2012 was the date. Was the year this started. It was legalized. It's been a long time here in.
Crazy, and I mean
it's changed. So honestly, I mean, it's really. I've only been a part of it for about 5 years.
Hmm.
So my journey has been when it's already kind of come off the ground. It's not, I kind of missed the medical piece. I've only really been involved in the rec market myself. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's really quite different. And the testing piece of it is really interesting. And I know that's part of our agenda. We're going to get into that, but
Yeah.
it makes it quite complex, especially when you're dealing with and producing a product that is an emulsion. So we, a little bit of background about my company and the product that I work on. We make Ripple, which the industry knows pretty well. It's a dissolvable powder that's meant to go in any beverage, and make anything inedible, basically. Not only beverages, you can also bake with it, and have a controlled dose. I've done that many times for holiday gatherings where you can just do the calculation and say like, okay, well, I put 100 milligrams in this batch of cookies. Each cookie is about four, so like have as many cookies as you want, but be careful. It's not plenty of can of butter anymore, not with Ripple at least. So you're not just like, making a wild guess at how much, like, should I eat half a cookie? Should I eat a whole thing? With Ripple, you can know how many milligrams is going to be in there. So it's really convenient. Depending on, of course, the size of the cookie, that'll always change the
Yeah,
milligrams.
definitely. Yeah. And I think that's something on the recreational side that I think the industry's done a good job of educating the public because, yeah, edibles react very differently than the smoke and things like this if you're inhaling it like that because
Yeah,
there's quite the curve right for it to take effect and people get caught because they'll eat something and they're like, oh, nothing's happening, right, and they'll eat a whole bunch more and then they get, to your point, in trouble.
yeah. Yeah, everybody has a really unique endocannabinoid system. The longer I've been in the industry, the more you can see like the variance that's in play in the human population. There are some people that can only like, they can become high with just, only inhalables,
Uh-huh.
because they don't have a specific enzyme in the liver to convert delta 9 to delta 11, which is the more, I believe, user friendly molecule in the blood. So weird things like that happen all the time, and that applies to not only THC but other cannabinoids as well. It makes it a really huge spectrum of efficacy in this
Hmm.
industry. So it's really the prospect of federal legalization. I think is really exciting because of the access to academia and research that this industry could have,
Hmm.
because right now it's pretty difficult. We actually have done a couple partnered studies with CSU, for pharmacokinetics so that we can understand, in our perspective it's really just like, how much of this can you absorb in your blood and how is that different based on a tincture or a like our emulsion versus a different emulsion versus Juana's nano gummies or, like I said, an oil or a can of butter or something like that. And there's a significant difference in the way that the body absorbs these things. Everything else, an emulsion makes the fat droplets smaller, and it increases the time or it decreases the time of absorption. So it's about 15 minutes for our product is the
Hmm.
onset, versus some others, but we won't get into that because it's not a conversation about PK.
Well, as you guys can probably tell here with this conversation, Paige knows a whole lot about this subject. So one of the things that we're here to do is answer your questions on this, right? So this is a golden opportunity to get those questions in there. So please fire them in the comments and we'll address them as they pop up. And so Don got his Jif peanut butter. I see. Yes, right. We've been waiting for that. So hopefully everything is working well at that plant. As everybody knows from a food safety standpoint, Jif had a big environmental problem with their plant in Kentucky. So hopefully that's all been cleaned up. So that's good. Um, so one of the things that's happening here in Colorado, so when elections are coming up, they send out a big old thick book that everybody gets with all the different referendums and the arguments for and against, things like this. And so one of the things that I noticed last night, Paige, was they have on the ballot here is mushrooms now too, right?
Yep. When you talk about innovative spaces, that's like, the next frontier, I think, in the like functional foods category. That's
Mhm.
something that is really exciting that I'm sure a lot of companies are looking into, not only for the properties of like the psychedelic nature or the psilocybin or psilocin, different compounds in mushrooms that create this kind of desired effect. There's also like a really huge industry out there for, like I said, the category of mushrooms as functional foods. And
Mhm.
I could probably talk about that a little bit too, but there's so many different kinds and they have some really unique and interesting benefits. But a lot of the studies are just super early,
Hmm.
really early on for that research and how it applies to the body and trying to separate correlation and causation a little bit, you know?
Yeah, there you go. Well, I mean, it's a part of this too, and this is why it's kind of neat, is that it's very rare that we get to see a whole new industry develop, and that's what's kind of cool about this space.
Yeah.
Where do
I,
you kind of, I mean, as we kind of sit back and look at the industry overall, Paige, where do you see things going? Are there certain trends, or because for a while, right, growing hemp, all of a sudden everybody wanted to grow hemp, and
mhm.
then it's pretty much died off, right, because the price crashed. And
Yep.
so, what type of things are you seeing in those areas?
Oh man. So there's two different legs of the conversation. There's the industrial hemp and then there's the THC side. Both of
Uh-huh.
them are actually the same plant, cannabis sativa. They have different variants. But so let's take a look at the CBD side first. So for the industrial hemp industry, about 4 years ago, we were buying CBD isolate at $22 a gram. At this point, it's down to a dollar or less.
Wow.
It has changed a lot. There was really once the Farm Bill passed in 2018, there was a surge and everybody wanted to grow, and then there was an abundance of isolate. Everybody was making it because it was the next hot thing. Obviously, then we had a pandemic.
Mhm.
The FDA's focus really, pivoted towards COVID, and obviously the way that we were managing that as a nation. CBD also, oh, it's difficult because of the claim that the pharmaceutical industry has on Epidiolex, which is a drug, an approved drug, that is basically a synthetic form of CBD isolate that is used to control seizures.
Uh-huh.
So that already exists, and as you know, something that is a drug cannot also be a food. So that's where it's just been this gray area where this has been sitting on the FDA's desk for years. And if you, I'm sure if you're interested in the topic, either our website or Justin, the CEO of the company that I work for, has spoken at length about the FDA and what is going on with this space. But basically, you know, they kind of killed the industry.
Mm.
There was an abundance. A lot of companies were really, really interested. It was the next hot thing in innovation. And there were a lot of huge companies looking at projects and just waiting, basically developing products, putting them on the back burner and getting ready for the FDA to say, okay, this can be regulated as a dietary supplement. And they just never did. So right
Interesting.
now, what we're seeing in the industry is a lot of companies are just either gone, or have been acquired, or are significantly paring down their resources. So that's kind of the state of the CBD. We've lost a couple suppliers along the way. There's been a couple acquisitions and changes in leadership and ownership. Um, we've been pretty lucky at Caliper and Ripple, where we're still Caliper and Ripple. We did, I won't get into the details, but on the THC side is also an interesting place. The market in general has changed, not super in a positive way, in the Colorado cannabis space. So what's been happening, uh, we believe, is that the cannabis tourism in Colorado is pretty much dead.
Mm.
Um, it used to be this novel thing where people had to travel to Colorado and be like, oh my gosh, this is where the
Cool.
only place I can get cannabis, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, if you look, there's over 30 states that have some variation of medical or recreational legalization. So people don't need to travel anymore to get cannabis. They can get it where they live. So that whole component of the industry here in Colorado is just gone. So right
Uh,
now, I think, if you look at, I wish there was a better way to see accurate data, for the market and sales of, who's buying what. It just doesn't exist, unfortunately, because of the structure of this industry. But yeah, a lot of the sales are just have evaporated.
hmm.
The whole on an industry as a whole. I believe that's happening from across flower and edibles as well.
So the general concern from politicians and things like this is, oh my God, they've legalized this product now everybody's going to turn into dope heads. Didn't happen.
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, there's definitely people that are higher users, but it's easy to make a generalization about who's using cannabis. Part of our brand identity in Ripple and Caliper is that this is meant for like literally everybody. We market from anywhere like 21 or 21 plus in the cannabis space or 18 plus in the CBD space. In the CBD side, people actually do like Epidiolex is meant for kids with seizures. The difference between that is obviously with Epidiolex, it's a synthetic, form of CBD. So the way that it comes into existence is different, but it elicits the same effect. The main difference, other than the fact that it's synthetic or natural, is with Epidiolex, the dosage is just really high. It's I think 20 milligrams per kilogram, which is like,
wow.
when you're talking
Kilogram. Wow.
CBD for wellness, people are in the 20 milligram range per day. I mean, you can do as many packets as or doses as you want, but it's the price is premium. People aren't using it at that rate. So yeah, it's very it's an interesting place and is really kind of the industry is poised for something. Well, I just don't know what that something is.
Well, I think part of it, yeah, from the legislature standpoint, and then we'll kind of move on to more down in the weeds type stuff here in Colorado. But so once the Democrats kind of took control of the House and the Senate and the presidency, okay, great. Now all of a sudden, all right, so legalizing marijuana at the federal level, that's finally going to happen, but it hasn't.
Yeah, no. And so I hope that something kind of moves before, but I don't have a lot of strong hope for it at this point. I think there are other that are kind of bigger that the politicians would like to address before cannabis.
Or jumping on that. So see, I think we answered Austin's question here, but so does the Colorado Department of Public Health monitor the food/edible aspect of the industry?
No, the CDPHE is focused on industrial hemp only. For the THC side, it's based on what county you're in. So we operate out of Commerce City, so we're subjected to tri-county health inspections. That's the regulatory body that is overseeing us from a food safety perspective. That's outside of the MED and the Marijuana Enforcement Division, which will look at overall regulatory compliance and really are much more focused on the movement of THC in and out of state from a producer level.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Marcel had a question here. My standpoint on this is a bit mixed because I'm in Texas, but a curious question. For medicinal purposes, are companies making THC or spectrum-controlled pills instead of inhalants and edibles? Some people with very acute medical conditions in other states may benefit. So any thoughts around that, Paige?
I mean, sure. I mean, it's definitely possible. I don't think that it really exists because, I mean, like I said, my expertise is not really in the medical market. So it could very well exist. I just don't know about it. I think Ripple is pretty much the closest you can get to a pill, because it's just a very small packet of THC, like 10 milligrams per dose. So it would be like having a capsule with a powder in it, but the powder is just not encapsulated.
Right. Yeah. So you dump it into a liquid or whatever. Okay, great. Hopefully that answers your question, Marcel.
I just don't know that there's a demand for it quite yet. I think that that's something that would absolutely explode if we did have a federal market, for sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that are just afraid, or they don't want the smell, or like they don't want to smoke it. And totally, that's why brands like ours exist, so that we can treat and people can feel better just throughout their life based on whatever they're dealing with their health.
Okay. Marshall has a question here as well. It's kind of a generic one, so let's see if we can kind of narrow it down. Where do you see the best opportunities to enter this industry at entry level and higher level? So so we're kind of guessing here, Marshall. So, give us a little more information if you need. So are you talking about as someone who wants to work in the industry or start a company what are you thinking here? Let us know. I don't know. How do you interpret that, Paige?
I interpret it as like someone who's just wanting to get a job in the industry.
Mhm.
Um, and that's a tough question. I was recruited actually from my old company. I used to work at Church and Dwight, and I had some really unique expertise in gummy product development. That was, the company wanted to launch gummies, so that's how I made it into the industry. I know there's a lot of people who move to Colorado in hopes to get, become a bud tender or work directly like that. The best advice I could give to anybody who wants to get into the industry is to get a badge, because you can't get any jobs without having an MED badge. So you need to pass like a background check, to make sure that you haven't been, you don't, no huge crimes, or you haven't been accused of, um, or convicted of like any felonies in the state
Oh,
of
yeah. Oh,
just
I
based
didn't
on.
know that. So it's kind of like a license to work in the industry, even for employees?
Exactly. Every single point employee is required to have a badge
Wow, that's
in
interesting. I didn't
Colorado.
know that.
That's not everywhere.
And again, yeah, that's an important point, right? Because everything varies by state. So you have to check with your local state of how they're managing things. Um, Good question, guys. Keep them coming. So I think, Marshall, that we kind of answered your question. If you need some more detail, please let us know in the comments. Austin, what are some of the standard practices with the industry around ensuring food safety? Where do these companies get their guidance or GMPs? Good question. So that's exactly what we're talking about here. We're also going to talk about testing. So let's tackle Austin's question here, then we'll jump into testing.
Sure. Sorry, my cat. If you hear her, my cat is just making an appearance. So good question. Food safety. Kind of. I was referring to this a little bit earlier in the discussion. The MED went about regulating and food safety and quality of edibles in kind of a unique way. They rewrote the rules, and we're trying to take little pieces from like industry experts and compile them into small chunks where they could demand that the industry follow these practices without closing businesses because they needed too many resources. So to answer
Mhm.
your question, Austin, the MED is responsible for ensuring food safety. Um, well, I mean, the individual license is responsible for ensuring food safety, but the MED is the regulatory body that will prescribe what is important. Now, there are some scientific work groups I've been a part of in the past, and we've had some really active discussions about what should be standard and what should
Mhm.
not be standard, right? We The way that it kind of works is that we have a lot of expertise from food, dietary supplements, and pharmaceutical spaces that are like, of course this is standard. What do you mean? Recall, like the traceability, like for ingredients that are not THC, of course that's important. We need to know and have supplier approval programs, and the whole gamut, like corrective actions. Like that's, to us, anyone in the food space is like, yeah, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
bread and butter. How do you have a quality management system if you don't have these components? But it was, like I said, it was an active discussion in the past couple of years, to get these core principles of the food safety implemented in the cannabis space. So what it actually looks like is, in the regulation, you have recall, corrective actions, good manufacturing practices, general, like in a general sense.
Uh-huh.
But they're diluted, to be a little bit more generic, and a little bit more focused, basically, of like, what's the most important part of this policy or program that we're going to ask this industry to do. So I know it's kind of ambiguous, but as an example, with corrective actions, you get, instead of going through and defining, the components of a really good corrective and preventive action program, and what a correction versus a corrective action versus a preventive action are, the MED rules would say something along the lines of, it's important to have a continuous improvement program, or like anything that's a nonconformance should be addressed or should be on hold. Now in the cannabis industry, it's really interesting, and this is pretty common across any state, is there is positive release in place. So it's really, that's a cool thing about this space. because the way that it works is you're selling, and you have such high restrictions on quantities of milligrams that can be like sold in a dose and
Mhm.
in a container. In Colorado, for example, in the rec space, it's a max of 100 milligrams. You can't have a serving size that exceeds 10. So really anything is a 10 by 10 that you're getting in the market, unless you're in the medical side, which is a totally different story. So in order to achieve that, the industry requires the third-party testing, which is like a whole bag of issues. Uh, but we need to, potency is the first thing that everybody's going to be looking at, and of course, there's some components of food safety that are really just a generic screen. So we
Mhm.
have a salmonella, stick, staph, E. coli, yada yada yada, and then total yeast and molds, total aerobic plate count, some basic stuff like that for microbial screens. So yeah, there's quite a bit that we have to do, and it's not in Colorado. We have this thing called reduced testing allowance. So when companies are producing regularly, instead of screening every single lot, you can actually test out of it. Um,
Oh,
so you say, okay, well, you have to do a surveillance program where you're submitting once a month a sample per every SKU you have, um, but you don't have to test per lot. So that's a kind of a you know, weird thing about Colorado. In Michigan, every lot is required to be tested for the full compliance panel, which includes residual solvents. Pesticides is not quite up and running yet. Pesticides is um, residual pesticide analysis has been interesting to watch because it's been not well implemented for both in the THC space and in the industrial hemp space, because there's a huge amount of variance in what pesticides are being tested, and then it's such a huge list of analytes. You're talking over 100 different pesticides that are in the screening, that all need to be validated at each lab, and not everybody has that equipment either. So that one has been very piecemeal and has been kind of coming up for a very long time. In Colorado, an easier way to do it is just to say, here's these 15 that we know are really no good. So any detectable quantity of these 15 pesticides, you're failing.
uh,
Instead of the other approach, like what they do in California, which is this 150 analyte panel. So every state has a very different pesticide screening process and in different levels of implementation, but
hmm.
and kind of deviated.
Well, no, that's great information, right? So, I mean, kind of the way I think of this page, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is so, I mean, there's kind of two buckets, and we're getting this in the questions, and we'll catch up on these. Is there's the food that we're used to, right? So, gummy bears and candy and these type of things, but that's the carrier, right? The whole purpose of having the gummy is to have the THC or CBD in that as the delivery mechanism, right? So, you're really kind of straddling two worlds, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why our company chooses to do like to comply with like to FDA and our regular CGMPs, because there are so many other ways that you can incur risk. With your other ingredients, especially making an edible, right?
Mhm.
Like we have about 20 plus ingredients that could be sourced with something that's a problem, and we
Mhm.
wouldn't know if it was incorporated into the product. So yeah, it's very, very interesting, and I'm sure not everybody has the same approach as the company that I work for. A lot of people are out there just trying to make a quick buck, and like buy sugar from the store. Which, I mean, maybe that's a strategy. You probably pay a premium for it, but anything that would make it all the way to retail likely is not going to have a huge issue. So that's one way people can do it. We choose to go through um, you know nationally known suppliers that have some type of audit scheme. We prefer GFSI. It's kind of funny that a cannabis company is out here asking for some GFSI certificates, from Ingredion or whatever, large companies out there that are, that are somehow, allowing us to source this ingredient.
Hmm.
Early, we couldn't even buy it because no one wanted to sell to someone who
Wow.
was producing THC.
Yeah,
So
because part of that, and yeah, we'll answer the food safety questions here, because part of the problem too, right, is in Colorado, and this is the federal problem, is the financial side, right? How do
Mhm.
you handle money, and can you have bank accounts, and how do you
Oh,
pay your
sure.
bills? And yeah, huge nightmare,
Yep.
because a lot of this was cash, right?
Yeah, and oh my gosh, like the food safety is such an opportunity for improvement in the state of Colorado for sure, and I'm sure in other states as well. Now, like if you look at our, the microbial methods that are required for testing on finished goods in this industry, I mean, like I said, they have a good range, but the methods themselves are not good, and the
Uh,
sampling that's required is not controlled. So when you're talking about micro testing, we submit a 25-gram sample for all of them, right? That's unheard of. Like we usually, and on the CBD side and for the FDA, you're doing 25 grams for salmonella, not
right.
25 grams, and then you do all of these other tests because then you have some sampling bias in there. Um, so yeah, there's definitely sampling in Colorado, very different story than Michigan. Michigan has come online a little bit, obviously later than Colorado and have been a lot smarter with the way that I think that they say reference, like I said before, reference the FDA for how to do good manufacturing practices. They actually do a license inspection in order to grant the license in
Uh,
Michigan that you're doing the right thing. Michigan also requires every lot to be tested for this full panel, which actually is a little excessive in my opinion. Um, but in addition to that, the lab actually is required to do the sampling. So
oh,
you don't have a choice in Michigan of what gets sampled, so you can't just cherry pick, the one that looks good. So
uh,
especially at the grow level, they can avoid maybe potentially having to do rework or any type of remediation on their flower by saying like, "Ooh, that section looks bad. Let me just pick this section of
over
flower.
a little bit over here. Yeah.
It doesn't have any mold or like or we don't think it's we can feel it doesn't have any extra moisture content, so it's not going to fail for water activity." So there's so many different things in Colorado that are a little bit, like I said, areas for improvement,
Uh-huh.
um, that you can raise up the standard of the industry, that are
Okay.
just currently
Oh.
on the docket but not done.
Yeah, so let's answer these questions. We'll get in the testing side because I'm curious about that. So essentially, what Austin and Gary are asking here, right, is so a lot of the traditional things that we're used to on the food side, right? So, do you have a HACCP or a food safety plan? Do you have GMPs in place? And we already talked about supplier approval and things like that. So, do you?
We do.
Yeah.
It is not required by the state. So the state, the MED says we need SOPs. Like some type of standard process, and you need to have some type of training program, and you need to have some type of way to ensure traceability.
Mhm.
But that is not a requirement in the Colorado cannabis sector. We
Interesting.
because that's important to us, so we maintain our own food safety plans because our company has the perspective that this is eventually going to be a federal thing, and we'd like to be able to service the whole country with our product because it's a really unique, cool product form.
Mhm.
So, yeah, no, that's not a requirement.
And Austin was asking about recall. So pathogens. So he's asking about salmonella in particular. I think there was, if I remember correctly, wasn't there a salmonella recall for? I don't think it was in Colorado, but I remember
No,
seeing
in
something.
the Colorado space, I have not seen a salmonella recall. I can't imagine they would ever even detect it because, like I said, it's a 1 gram sample.
But
um, and it's also Colorado, and at least for us, we have a lot of we have a dry process. So, and the other really cool thing about cannabis is the antimicrobial properties.
mhm,
We've done on the caliper side, a challenge study and have discovered that with cannabinoids, you can range from bactericidal to bacteriostatic. Um,
wow.
so it's very much on the table for common food safety issues like pathogens like E. coli 157H7 and salmonella um, may not even be an issue in this space, not require or warrant any extreme levels of control because they just don't grow.
Hmm.
Um, Not saying that growth is the only way to to have a problem, but that's and on my experience, at least on the, on the CBD side, that that's not an issue. We
Mhm.
do have it in our food safety plan, and it is addressed, but we don't have to apply preventive controls for things like that, because it's just not required.
Interesting.
We've done the challenge study to prove it.
Huh. Well, and to your point earlier, it'd be great if you had access to research sources, at universities and
Yeah,
do studies and these type of things, but it's very limited, which is a bummer.
yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier, Paige. I'm sorry. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
The onus is on companies to be really trying to do the right thing, and it's almost it can be near impossible in some ways. Like for THC, we can't do a challenge study, so we have to extrapolate. Um, you know, okay, well, in the CBD space and with these other cannabinoids, we see that this is the same effect, so it's likely to be the same for THC because we can't send a THC product to a regular micro lab that would be able to execute this type of study for us because they
Mhm.
ask they make us fill out a questionnaire saying, is there any THC in the product? And obviously there is.
Yeah.
The point is, and we want to have that paperwork that says THC is bactericidal, you know? Um, anyway.
That would be very helpful for hazard analysis. Yes, that would.
Yeah.
So the other thing, and correct me if I'm wrong on my simple interpretation of this, right, is so you had talked earlier about, calculating serving size. So if you have a edible or something like that, and you have a package with more than one serving, you can't go above 10 milligrams per serving, correct?
So there's a 15% variance that's allowed in Colorado. So plus or minus 15%. So if you have a 10 milligram serving, which is usually the target, you can always go less. But most of the time people want like maximum amount.
Mhm.
So what 8.5 to 12.5 is the range. Anything outside of that in milligrams is going to be a fail.
A fail. And so then if it fails, and so this is outside testing for the labs, and we'll talk about that in a second, but if it fails, what happens then?
You have to destroy the product. You can't
Ooh.
sell it remediation for potency.
And if you're one of these companies that's doing the monthly program where you're sending samples, does that impact the entire month of production back to the last test?
You'd have to, well, so they would allow you to, I believe, submit another 3 samples over the next 30 days in order to keep that status. So
Uh,
it doesn't just automatically say like, okay, you're done. You can keep it as long as you can prove, so to speak, so that that you're doing things the right way and the rest of your SKUs, and maybe it was just a one-off.
okay, that's interesting because yeah, my next thought on that process then would be okay if you fail that resampling process for that month, is that a recall?
Validate, yes. So if you fail any one of those like 3 or 4, I can't remember exactly what the number is off the top of my head. If you fail any one of those, then you reset. You have to start
Yeah.
again. And when you start the process validation or reduced testing allowance process, you have to submit X number of samples over the course of this many days or weeks, and it can't
Uh,
be this many. Like so, there's some unique things there.
Interesting. So who does this testing then?
All the licensed MED licensed labs. So the MED is issued. I don't know, not too many, but there are a few licenses that operate and service the industry, and
Mhm.
each one of these labs does everything. It's kind of weird, compared to what we would be used to in the food space. There are some of those labs in our regular food space that do have it all, but
Mhm.
even a huge organization like Eurofins would have like a micro lab and then a analytical, a more of like an analytical chemistry lab. So all of these cannabis labs are responsible for all of these tests. It would not be strategically on their part smart to just say like we're only going to do micro, because you have to do a manifest to transfer every single sample to where it's going, have a licensed courier. It gets expensive really fast. So
Oh yeah.
each of the labs does everything. So micro and the analytical components of the testing.
Okay. And so all those labs then have to be in Colorado, is right? You can't send
Mhm.
samples out of state because then you're going to get in trouble.
Correct. And that really limits our ability to choose quite a bit.
Mhm. So then so there's certain labs that you've approved then to send your samples to, or I've heard about people who kind of shop around and will send samples to different labs, and then
Oh yeah. If you've been doing it long enough, you really know which labs are always going to give you the high results and which
Mhm.
labs are on the lower side. So you can really cherry pick based on what labs are out there, what results you want. Um,
Wow.
it's a that's the thing about the industry that I really it's been pretty difficult to deal with, honestly. And to what your question was is assuming you have a qualified lab,
Mhm.
yes and no. We only have a couple options, right? So if you're in the Denver metro area, how far do you want to go? Or like, are you willing to pay for a courier to bring this to wherever? Sometimes a lab will offer free pickups. If they do, that's a incentive obviously to use them. But yeah, it's qualification, I would say, is probably not something that most companies are doing in the cannabis space, but they're actually just having a fly by the seat of their pants, way of being like, okay, well, we know that this lot might be, some companies do have internal HPLCs, so that they can kind of tell where their product is going to be, and then say like, you know what, I'm going to send it to this one because I know I'm going to get a higher result.
Uh-huh.
Now, there are some good actors out there, both in obviously the producer side, the processor side, and the lab side. I have identified a lab that does work with us on corrective actions, investigations, opening like retesting and doing a full data review whenever there's something that looks kind of off for us.
Uh-huh.
So that they are out there, but most of the time those ones are skewing on the lower side. So it makes the supplier relations a little bit more challenging for those companies that aren't vertically integrated, because if we're trying to purchase bulk distillate, and we're saying we only want to use this lab, and that we know that this lab is going to test low compared to all the other labs, even though we have confidence that they have like customer service, investigative power, and they look at the CRM, certified reference material that is used for potency assessment. And they've done this enormous study, multi-lot across multiple months, to see which companies out there are selling a good standard.
Mhm.
And certified reference material is what's used to calibrate the instruments and making sure that their quality control is in check and that their potency results are being issued accurately and
Mhm.
precisely. Um, so that said, it's it's very challenging to deal with the third party lab space and make sure that we're testing, like you're sending out a product that not only meets regulatory requirements but also will deliver the consumer an accurate and consistent experience.
Hmm.
Because when you have a 15% range, I'll tell you, like, it is 8.5 is very different than 12.5. That's
Yeah.
almost like two different products,
Yeah.
for someone who has a lower tolerance, right? There are going to be people out there that have really, really high tolerances that are like, makes no difference, but for the consumer that really relies on that 10, it's important.
Oh, absolutely. Huh. Very interesting. So then the variances in the methodologies and things like this, is this kind of tied to that standardization piece then? So, I mean, in other spaces, you have AOAC and things like this for
Oh my God.
methodologies. And these, is there any type of a standard associated with that in this space?
Oh, good question. So yes and no. There is a standard way to do potency testing on the HPLC, but there's a huge amount of variance in prep methods. So there's not a standard prep method for, like, it varies based on the matrix, right? Like flour is going to be something different than a gummy, and gummy will be different than Ripple. Like I said, our emulsion, we need something, you might need to use different solvents in order to make that extraction accurately. So, you might need a different amount of time in order to to vortex it. There's so much nuance, and
Huh.
there no standardization when it comes to prep method. So
Hmm.
yes.
Yeah, I just had this picture in my head of Yeah, a technician in the testing laboratory with a a bunch of gummy bears trying to mash up gummy bears or something to get a good sample. How do you even do that? Yeah.
Oh, it's difficult, and that's not even considering the fact that the labs have a lot of turnover because you know, they're not paying super well for the technician level. In Colorado, there's typically pretty high turnover, or there has been in the industry. Maybe it's not that way anymore, and maybe they've adjusted wages appropriately at post pandemic. But that was something that we dealt with for quite a while, a couple of years ago.
Well, that's the pandemic. That's an interesting question. Um, what happened with your company, just kind of at a generic level relative to sales during the pandemic? Did sales go up because everybody was stuck at home, or did you guys notice anything going on during COVID? Or
You know what? I am not the best person to ask for the sales data, but I believe that the market like went up at first and then softened. So obviously when everyone was home, there was a huge rush out to get like alcohol. There's a huge rush out to the dispensaries. But the pandemic obviously was a 2-year ordeal. So once everybody got their their rush in, once it kind of became a regular thing, I think it kind of cooled off quite a bit.
then everybody kind of settled in,
Mhm.
as it were. Okay, interesting. Um, so we'll kind of circle this back to the food safety side of things because people are asking questions relative to that. What are kind of in this space? What are some of the big watch outs that you're looking for? So like allergens, micro. We talked about pesticides. What are from a food safety standpoint? What are some of the things that you worry about, Paige?
Good question. Food safety is not an enormous, like generally not a huge risk for our operation. So for me, let's see. Like I alluded to earlier, we've done a couple challenge studies, and the microbial contaminants are low on my list of things that I'm worried about. So for me, a lot of the focus is on foreign material, and screening our inbound distillate. So our foreign material can occur obviously anywhere. Anyone who is involved in a food manufacturing process knows this. So we do have some like mastication or grinding, and we're using food equipment to make our
Mhm.
products. So, really focusing on that preventative maintenance and making sure that we're looking at each component and that it's being addressed regularly, for looking at chips, grind, or where, and that's a continuous improvement all the time, because we adapt and change um, our our processes, to accommodate demand, to accommodate new projects. So that's
Mhm.
been a evolving thing for us. But yeah, so foreign material is probably the biggest one for us,
Mhm.
that we have to just keep an eye on, and that's an internal control for us from a food safety perspective. So metal. Plastic on the hemp side. Oh man, we've gotten so much foreign material in our CBD isolate. It's a little shocking, because you can tell that there's a lot of people that are out there that are not doing the right thing based on what's coming in the material. And it's
Mhm.
not for lack of effort on the QA side for qualifying a vendor, because there's a lot of people out there that have a GMP certificate, that aren't doing best practices on a regular basis, but maybe just can front for the audit. Um,
No,
but
it's like that
yeah.
old saying in QA, right? Trust but verify.
Exactly. Yep. So that's what we do on the CBD side. We actually, we've applied a preventive control for foreign material, screening our CBD isolate. So we take a magnetic wand, and a sieve, a 150 micron sieve, to just get rid of all of the, once we dissolve the CBD, we're fortunate enough to have to to take and use the CBD isolate. We dissolve it in a carrier oil, so we're able to heat it up and then run it through the sieve, get out of all of the raw material, both not only from a food safety perspective but also from a quality perspective, right? So we're finding lint, plant material. We found plastic, like a large piece of plastic before. We found like a large wood chip, or splinter, so there are things that are out there. Foreign materials for sure the thing across both all ends of the cannabinoid spectrum, that is a concern that we control for.
Mhm.
Um, from a chemicals standpoint, allergens, I would say on the food industry as a whole would probably be a major concern, because people aren't really, they're not sophisticated. Like I said, if you don't have a food safety plan, you're not likely to be looking at allergens or even labeling your products appropriately. So that is something that on an industry as a whole, I would say that we can absolutely do better. We have always overclaimed, not overclaimed, but, claimed coconut because we were using a coconut derived MCT oil, and we didn't have the supplier assurance to prove that it was not present. And we didn't want to test every single lot. So our option was to label. And not everybody is going to take a conservative approach like that. And coconut is not likely to be a very common allergen for people and consumers. And it's kind of a weird one anyway, because it's not a tree nut. But
Yeah.
and it's highly refined oil, but we decided to just label it anyway, until we found a supplier that could give us a certification and a statement that says, we know that there's no coconut protein in this.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Very interesting.
So other chemical thing, heavy metals.
Yeah.
That's another thing that is something that, cannabis sativa is a bioremediator. If you have a plant that's growing outside, it's probably going to pick up some stuff. Usually it's not a concern. It's like another low risk for me, but depending on where it is that you're growing, or if you're getting hemp from overseas, that could be a major issue. So again, depending on your operation, whether you're doing CBD or THC, and whether or not you're restricted to local or, local grows, or you're doing indoor, outdoor, there's so much variance there. And heavy metals would be something that I would say is something to watch out for if you're going to be in this space, depending on what you've got, for your inputs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anytime you're dealing with an agricultural product, you need to definitely worry about those things. So let's kind of bring this back to the 30,000 foot level. This has been fascinating. And so first off, Paige, I want to thank you and commend you on all the good work that you're doing. And I think in this space, right, good players will win out, right? And so people who are in there just trying to make a buck, I think a lot of those have already been weeded out, right? And so the cream of the crop comes forward, and they're the ones that are going to lead the industry to this next level. And I think Caliper and your work there is part of that. So congratulations on everything you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. You deserve it. So any closing thoughts on this space? Anything we haven't talked about that you want to share with our group today, or?
Oh man, you've got some good questions about food safety, and I wish that I had better answers. I wish the industry was what it should be, but you know what? I think that's pretty common even in the FDA regulated space. There's a lot of companies out there that are not aware or doing the things that they should be doing. So we just have the extra challenge of melding two different purposes and industries together. And I think that really, if nothing else, the cannabis space opens up the opportunity to look at other types of functional foods. Like I said before in the beginning of the conversation, mushrooms. If that to be a controlled substance, then we already have an infrastructure and a way to accommodate this. You were talking about, Bryan, the ballot and legalization of psilocybin here in Denver. It could be a useful, way to get that into people's hands, I guess,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So, wow, man, time flew on this. This is an awesome conversation. So I'm going to do something kind of cool here. So with my locals group on the food safety side of things, I've just put in here a special promo code under FSMA. So if you use this link, you can get a free month on the membership side of things to kind of check things out. So I wanted to kind of help grow this and give everybody a little thank you here for the people who are watching this and helping to improve safety. So thank you for that. And again, guys, these type of conversations benefit us all. We get this new perspective and we're able to widen what we're looking at. And so people out there like Paige who are doing a lot of good work around this, it's great to be able to share this information. That's how we get better. So we'll close out the conversation here for today. But don't forget, next week, we're back again with the next food safety chat. So it's going to be at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, bright and early for us here in Colorado, 10 a.m. East Coast. So please join us for the next food safety chat, and we will see you there. Paige, enjoy your weekend. I hope you have an awesome time. I know I'm going to go out and have some fun, and I hope everybody else does too. So enjoy, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Paige.
Thanks, Bryan.
Bye.